January 1976. You first hear about this kidnapping. How? When does this come across your desk?
What happens is my mother was in Memorial Hospital. She had a serious cancer condition. I was visiting her, and in her room there's TV, and then here comes this bulletin that there had been a kidnapping. So that's when I first hear about it. Now, back in those days, we didn't run around with cell phones.
Right.
So I ended up calling the office, and they basically said that she had been shot. And there's a little gap in time. I mean, this just didn't happen in a matter of minutes. And so I went out to the scene, which was eventually on Turan Road. And it was fairly quick to when that announcement came on. I think it was pretty quick from the announcement to when they found out she had been shot. She was still on the ground, but she was covered. And I just went up there and observed the body.
How long had you been working at the district attorney's office at that
I
point?
started I got out of law school in 72, so it would have been latter 73 or early 74. I'd have been in about 2 years. And I think I left in 78, 79, something like that.
Where were you still? What were your feelings going to a scene like that and seeing this woman face down on the ground with a
Well,
bullet?
no one heard me. I didn't know her very well, but somebody that was at my church and went to my church at St. James, and I saw her like that. And now this is before we ever interviewed him. I said, "Look at this, man. I mean, this is almost like a contact wound to the back of the head." And I'm just thinking this was execution. It wasn't execution killing. Why because, really, he drove all the way out there, took her out of the car. Now, why is he taking her out of the car? And he claims she ran. How is she going to run? I don't see his thinking on that. Well, I'm going to take her out of the car. If he was going to take her somewhere, he could have taken her further out in the woods, left her there, and drove off, but he wasn't going to do that.
Because he didn't have, there wasn't a house. He didn't have a house out there or anything, right?
No.
This was just a piece of wooded property?
Yeah, that's from what I recall. Now, you got to remember that's a long time ago, and I'm sure that area is entirely different now than it was. And so at that point in time, I had no idea what his so-called story was. Now, the courthouse, the old courthouse had burned, so the court had moved to the Markham building, and that's where the FBI had their office. So they brought him up there, I think, to either the 7th or 8th floor. I don't recall which one. And I went up there because the FBI had him. And of course, you had Barkin Smith, you had various individuals. And it was during the interview that I got some idea of listening to what he had to say about, in my mind, how absurd his version was of the shooting. I was just trying to fire a warning shot. And then at that point in time, he told him where the gun was in the Biloxi River. But he never said, yes, I put the gun to the back of her head and shot her, excuse me.
Has he ever admitted to doing that?
No, everything has always been, it was a warning shot. We had a psychiatric examination done on him at this time. I say at this time when this case originally broke. And it was done by Dr. Maggio. But we didn't use it because he wasn't claiming insanity or lack of capacity. I've heard him mumbling some of that around lately. But Dr. Maggio said, no, he's saying he's competent to stand trial. He understands what's going on. And then from there is the rest of the story.
Trial after trial.
The first trial, I believe, was in July
That same year.
76. But it was on change of venue. It was in Jackson County. And then we had to try him. We convicted him, and we had to try him again because the United States Supreme Court had come down with that decision applicable like a capital murder case, it has to be bifurcated. The jury has to consider guilt or innocence first, and then when they do that, they can go back and deliberate the punishment. Back then, it was automatic death under the old statute. And so we tried him again for the second time. And the Fifth Circuit got it on appeal, and I think I've got this right. We were using jury instructions that came down from some of these other Supreme Court cases dealing with the death penalty. So we were basically mirroring what was in those instructions. So we use those in the Fifth Circuit. So, well, those instructions don't properly channel the jury's thought process. So I had to try them again. And then you know the rest of the story, all the way to the last trial. Of course, every time he got any kind of relief, it took him off of the death row.
Right.
And then when there was a conviction and a sentence of death, he put him back on death row. So he moved around a lot. I mean, obviously never got out of punishment, but it would be a question of, whether he was on death row or whether or not he was just in a regular area with other inmates.
I want to back up just slightly, just to go over the course of events. Richard Gerald Jordan comes up with this. How? He was in Louisiana, and to your best recollection, how does it kind of unfold?
What happens, I know in Louisiana, he had a shotgun, and I think he traded in for the .38 caliber that he used.
The handgun.
Now, you got to picture how 25th Avenue looked at the time. The Gulf National Bank was right on the corner. When I say the corner, they'd been on the west side of 25th Avenue. Jordan apparently had this thing in mind. He was going to do this. This wasn't something he just all of a sudden decided to do. So he calls Gulf National Bank, and he wanted to speak to I believe it was senior commercial loan officer, because he knew that person would have unrestricted and pretty easy access to money. I mean, he's your senior commercial loan officer. The lady that he talked to said, well, he's not here right now, but you can call him back. He said, okay, thank you. Now, he was calling from a phone booth in a gas station that was right across the highway. So he opens the phone book and looks, and there's only one Charles Marter. The lady that talked to him gave him the name of Charles Marter. And he sees only one Charles Marter. Southern Circle, I think that's the address. So he goes out there. He drives out there, but he sees two cars. And at that point in time, obviously he thinks the husband's home. I don't know how much time he spent riding around, but eventually he comes back and there's only one car there, which would have been Edwina's. He knocks at the door, and I thought it was Westinghouse he was claiming to be, but it was General Electric. He was claiming to be a rep for General Electric, and that he was checking faulty circuit breakers. I know she probably didn't think through that, but why would General Electric be out there checking faulty circuit breakers? So as soon as I think she invites him in, and I think she said something to him, maybe according to him, follow me, I'll show you where the circuit breaker is. She took, 4 or 5 steps. He pulls out a gun, points it at her, told her that she was going to have to leave with him. Now, the 2-year-old or 3-year-old was there. At some point thereafter, they got in the car and drove west on 90 and took that right turn right here, 25th Avenue. As I mentioned to you earlier, I think I mentioned to you, I don't believe that she was driving. It wasn't a big issue, really, because the issue was her execution and death. But he insisted she was driving, and I don't buy that. Because the bank she went by was her husband's bank. And she knew, she's a smart lady, she knew that something bad was going to happen to her wherever her destination was in North Harrison County.
So you think she would have done something to
drive
through the front of the bank or something to get away? Something.
I don't think she'd have just calmly driven down 25th Avenue with this guy holding a gun on her, taking her to the northern part of Harrison County to obviously execute her. That wasn't a super big issue, but in my mind that bothered me. Now, during the course of the investigation, and I don't remember when, this would have been after he was arrested, he being Jordan, and I don't remember if it was a state law enforcement officer or the FBI. It was a conversation. We didn't have any documents, but they said, well, we got her hair strands that were in the trunk. I never saw any report. I never saw anything about it. But again, I was more focused on, well, whether she was in the trunk or she was driving. It has nothing to do with what happened when they got out there. But whoever this officer was or this agent was, he was convinced that they had her hair strands from the trunk. And then the rest of the story is he gets out there and no doubt in my mind, I think he put her on her knees. We know he shot her in the back of the head.
Pretty close range, too, from ballistics, right? 6 to 7 inches?
I think closer than that.
Really?
I hired a well-known pathologist. Y'all may not, or may have heard of him. His name is J.T. Francisco. He's in Memphis. I hired him. I paid for him out of my own pocket. I wasn't getting any money after I left the DA's office all the way up to today. I've never been paid anything. I haven't asked for anything. And I paid for this expert to testify, and his testimony was pretty dynamic. He said that gun was about 3 or 4 inches behind her head.
And this is the same forensic pathologist that had done work on Martin Luther King?
Yeah, he did the autopsy on Martin Luther King and Elvis Presley, or was involved in Elvis Presley's in the autopsy, and was a very strong witness. And they tried to cross-examine him, but that was an exercise in futility. He says he kept holding up those pictures, and you could see the burn, the wound. And you could tell it was relatively close. And it was, I can't give the exact spot, but it was close to the base. And of course, unfortunately, the exit point was through the forehead at some point.
That trajectory wouldn't be...
She was down, it would have been the head down here, out.
Right.
And that's pretty much, I didn't argue that consistently, but I talked about it. No way was she running. Her head was down. Entrance wound is here. Entrance wound is here. The place where the bullet exited is here. Head's down. He executed her. And every jury so far has believed that.
During these trials, and I know a lot of the times you're focused more so on the jury and on your paperwork and making sure you have your questions prepared. Did you ever notice Richard Gerald Jordan's demeanor during this stuff?
Yes, I did. He was very stoic. He never blurted anything out. Sometimes in a high-profile criminal case or in any criminal case, you could have a defendant that's irate and all of a sudden he starts blurting something out. He never did that. His demeanor never changed. Facial expressions never changed. He didn't testify in every case. There was a couple cases he testified in. Some he didn't. But he was pretty cool, calm, and collected. And I never saw anything that indicated to me that he was a disturbed guy. He was well under control. Very stoic, but paying attention. He wasn't shaking his head or disagreeing with anybody. He was playing the role pretty good.
Does it make any sense to you why he would execute Edwina Marter before even making the ransom, even going to a movie theater after?
I think he really thought in his mind, yes, he did go to a movie, you're correct. I think he thought in his mind that if he made the demand, and the first time the demand was made was shortly that night after he made his first call, and that money was put on the side of the road on the way to Stone County. But Jordan was off in the woods where he could see what was going on, and he didn't pick up the money. He called Mr. Marter and said, I can't remember his exact words, something like, you try to trick me. I saw the FBI cars behind you because they were trailing behind him.
I thought it was a setup.
Yeah. The next day, they talk again. He says, we'll bring the money out to Interstate 10. You're going to see a jacket on the side of the road. Put the money there, and you better not have the police with you. And during the various conversations, he would tell Chuck, when Chuck would inquire, says, look, your wife's fine. She's asking about the kids. To me, which is about as callous as it comes. Yeah, she wants to know how the kids are doing. And I think at one point Chuck said, let me talk to her. He said, I can't do that, but she's fine. Yeah, in my mind, it takes a very cold individual to use the kids and to lead Chuck down this primrose path that maybe his wife is still alive. But anyway.
Because during all this, she's lying
She's
face
in the
down
woods.
in the woods.
That's correct. And you know what he told Chuck was, look, when you're heading down Interstate 10, I better not see any more law enforcement behind you. Well, they tried to follow Chuck, but Chuck lost them in downtown Gulfport. And Chuck got on the interstate and headed that way. But Larkin Smith and an FBI agent, I think his name was Charles Shepard, I'm not sure, was in Larkin's truck. And they were parked up on the opposite side of the interstate right there by Canal Road, where Jordan was going to pick up the money and exit off. And that's where they were. And Jordan did pick up the money and exit down Canal Road, but Larkin was in his truck. They got in a high-speed chase. But Jordan knocked Larkin's truck off into a ditch. But Larkin was able to get the tag number. And back in those days, I guess in Louisiana, wasn't that way in Mississippi, they had your picture on your driver's license. So they had a picture of him at some point thereafter. He went to Norwood Village Shopping Center. He had on, I can't remember if he had on a blue jumpsuit and changed to red, or he had on a red and changed to blue. He hid some money in the back after he walked out of there in an abandoned car in the woods. And then you call Yellow Cab to come pick him up. Yellow Cab comes out there and there's a driver named Jackie Robinson.
Like the baseball player.
Yeah. And so Jordan gets in the car and Jackie Robinson says, look, we're going to have to take some back roads. Some idiot has killed a lady. And of course, Jordan doesn't say anything. So Jackie Robinson takes a back road down. I know you've been by the Gulfport Airport. As you're going sort of east to in it winds around.
Right. There is Washington right there.
Well, it was a little bit different configuration, but they had a roadblock there. And a guy named Rudy Tollison, who was a former Gulfport policeman and later worked for the Marshal Service, was handling that roadblock. And he approached the car and he asked Jordan for his driver's license. He looked at it. And he looked at the copy he had. He said, stay right here. I'll be through with you in a minute. He took about 4 steps and pulled his gun out. Don't you move. I'll shoot you if you do. Well, about that time, Jackie Robinson, the driver of the car, gets out. He jumps on the hood, screaming and yelling, don't shoot me. I had nothing to do with any of this. And I'm not making light of the killing, but this Jackie guy, yeah. That night, he was interviewed by WLOX, and he was describing himself as somebody like, I was cool, calm, and collected, didn't bother me, I was doing my job, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm watching this. I was saying, you're on the hood of the car yelling. you wouldn't try, I don't know what your definition of doing the job was. And Rudy Tollison told me this, said the guy was yelling, I thought he was going to have a heart attack. And so at that point, he was arrested and taken to what is now the Markham Hotel.
Right.
Like I tell you where the officers were, they'd set up because of the fire at the old courthouse. And that's where it started. And he cooperated, like where the gun was. But during that interview, he insisted that it was a warning shot.
And he's maintained that all these years.
Until recently, I've read somewhere where there's some issue raised about his mental capacity or awareness or something. I didn't pay a lot of attention to it.
He's 79 now,
Yeah, because I was 27, he was about 30, give or take, so that's close. And then from that point on, the gun was retrieved from the Biloxi River. And then the scene was properly analyzed. And then the first trial, I believe, was in July of 76 in Jackson County. It was actually before Judge Darren Maples, who's now deceased. And you know the rest of the story. Appeal, trial. I went through 4 trials, and then the last one, I want to say 98. I think that's right. And here we are today.
Wow. Do you think, this guy has been in prison almost 50 years. He's 79 years old. Do you think execution at this point might just be a moot point? Or do you think, 50 years to get to this point?
I thought about it, and, and you're right. It's on the doorsteps. He's been in jail 50 years. Are they going to go through an execution of a man that's 80 years old that's been in jail since he was 30? I don't know. The execution's set. I did have a family member call me about whether I was going to go, and I said, no, I'm not going to go. I don't need to go. I said, I've lived with this case for 50 years. Whatever happens, but I'm not interested in going because, like I said, I've been living with this case since 1976. And I'm not interested in seeing any more of Richard Gerald Jordan. And I'm not interested in seeing somebody necessarily die. Now, what he did, in my mind, was just utterly atrocious. Kill a wonderful woman like that. And then to use comments like, well, your children, your wife's asking about the children, and she's going to be fine, and et cetera, to me indicates a definite callous attitude. He didn't have to say that. He could just say, look, give me my money and I'll tell you what's going on. But he used the children in her, which would strike home with Chuck. And, the more I thought about it, I said, this is about as egregious as it gets. Killing is one thing, yeah, obviously. But talking about her children, and the wife wanting to know how the children are when he had killed her before anybody ever knew she was out there. But going back to your question, I don't know what they'll do on actually going through with the death penalty. This case shouldn't have taken 50 years. Shouldn't have taken anything near 50 years. Does that aid the family? Does that assist the Marter family? I'm sure there are some on the Marter side that's still grieving, even though it's 50 years later. They may have a different opinion, but I don't know if execution 50 years later serves as any kind of deterrent. Obviously, it would for Jordan. It would take his life. And there's been a lot of money spent because he had appointed counsel all the way through it, multiple lawyers. And I spent a lot of money getting ready for these trials. And in my mind, up until this recent ruling by the Mississippi Supreme Court, I was just convinced in my mind, look, this has been going on 50 years and they're not going to do anything. They're just going to let him spend his time and he'll pass away in jail. And I pretty much left it at that, in my mind. But I'm 50 years of it. And, it's not just the amount of work I do. It's the trauma of Chuck and his 2 sons having to go through this. He said, well, it's only been 4 times. Well, let me tell you, 4 times spread over a number of years. And when you put family members through that, especially the older child, who I think was in the 3rd or 4th grade at St. James, that's traumatic. And for Chuck, every time we had a trial, and the ones he came to, and I think he came to all but maybe one, he couldn't stay in the courtroom. He would walk out. He was so torn up. So where's the end point? Some say, well, this guy should have been murdered a long time ago. Or not murdered, should have been killed, or his life should have been taken. I question the length of time. I'm not sure. I haven't looked nationwide, But I know in Mississippi, I can't think of anyone that's been on death row 50 years, and now there is now a ruling that you're going to be executed. I never could figure out why this thing was going in such a slow pattern. A lot of it had to do with him.
Because at one point you had a plea deal on the table, right? To just life in prison without without the possibility of parole.
What happened was, and this is before another judge, under the old statute, it was mandatory death on a capital case. But the statute also provided for life, but it did not provide for life with the benefit of parole like it does now. Well, the defense counsel talked the judge into allowing him to plead to life with the right of parole, but that's not in the statute. And we appealed it, and the Supreme Court reversed it, said you can't do that. That's not your privilege. That would fall within another department, and you're adding something to the statute that's not there. So that starts us all over again, Oh, Jesus, here we go. But I felt so sorry for those boys because they sat behind me in the trials they were at, and their daddy was right next to them. And I'm sitting at a counsel table 8 feet in front of them. And they heard a lot of the testimony. That's traumatic. And what I did, I showed the jury the photographs, but I tried to do it in such a fashion with the screen where only the jury could see it and they could see it. Because what it was pictures of her head, particularly the back part of the head and then parts of the autopsy, to show the trajectory of the bullet consistent with what we talked about earlier, that
right,
her head was down.
Entry and exit wound.
And I tried to keep that away from them. And the judge allowed me to do it. I would either turn the screen away from them. And I don't know if I made a comment to them about it. I may have, I may not have, but I think if I would have said anything, I'd have said, look, guys, y'all don't need to be looking at this. I'm doing this for the benefit of the jury. They need to see what happened. But I know it was tough on them. I could just see it in their face, especially Chuck. Because, he went through the ordeal too. And he didn't know his wife was dead until she was found. So I'm sure that during that, on the day of the 12th of January, he was praying, my God, I just hope, my wife is alive. And as we've talked about several times, he killed her before Chuck ever knew that she was kidnapped.
When's the last time you've talked with Chuck?
It's been a while.
It's been a while.
Oh, I haven't talked to him. I used to talk to him quite a bit when we get close to a trial. But I haven't talked to him about this. I'm reluctant. I'm not reluctant to talk to him. But with this thing coming down 50 years later and now his death sentence is set, I didn't want to call Chuck until I knew what the final result was going to be. Because I go tell him what the Mississippi Supreme Court has set a death penalty. I set the date of execution for this. And then 24 hours before the execution, they stay it. It doesn't change him, but it puts him through more frustration.
You get the hope of, we're finally past this.
That's correct. This thing is finally over. So I didn't call it. But I'm going to once I can determine what the courts are going to do on this, trying to stay the execution. The Supreme Court's denied it, and in every hearing they've denied that. The Mississippi Supreme Court. But to be honest with you, I don't know where it goes from here. And it may go straight to execution.
Does it feel kind of, pointless? The execution to finally happen?
Well, yes and no. The no part is if I'm in the Marter family's position and I'm looking at 50 years of this and finally I'm going to get justice, he's going to be put to death like my wife was, I can understand that. And then you look at the other side and say, 50 years, man. Every officer involved in this case just about's dead. You don't have any live witnesses. And if we had to try it again, I would be shocked if any juror or prospective juror, other than maybe what they read in the paper, would have even heard of Edwina Marter or Richard Gerald Jordan. But what it does and what has always bothered me, this elongated process doesn't look good in my mind, for our judicial system. This is a clear book. I mean, it's a clear execution. And we've taken all this time, 50 years, and I can see from their part, and they may not feel the same way. They may think, what's the use? But I know that poor family went through unmitigated hell, especially Chuck and the older son, for years and years and years and years. Does that bring back mother? Of course not. But does it send the wrong message that you got a guy that beat the system for 50 years and now he's managed to beat the death penalty? So those are just different positions I'm sure sharing with you.
Yeah. What's that unique situation that I doubt anybody ever thought?
I'm not aware of any case like this. I'm not saying one doesn't exist.
Certainly not common practice.
And I went to the hospital when the autopsy was done. I'd never seen an autopsy. And I stayed there for about 5 minutes. And I walked out because I knew her. And, I just told the doctor, I said, I can't remember the pathologist's name, but he was well known here. I think he's deceased now. I said, look, I'm not used to this. I've been to autopsies where they were complete and there were being pictures taken by law enforcement. I had been to those before, but nothing like this one. And he was showing me the trajectory of the bullet. I said, look, I got the message.
I'll be in the hall.
Yeah, I'll be in the hall. Otherwise, you're going to have to carry me out in the hall. It got to me because I knew the lady. And I'm sitting there thinking, what if that was my wife? What if that was my daughter? And just the whole process is just sort of unprecedented when you sit there and figure the time involved. And you point out, what's the benefit in all this?
Why did, the only question I want to ask you here, I think this is the only thing we haven't really covered, is why the ransom? Why did Richard Gerald Jordan do this? Why did he need, at first, $50,000 and then $25,000?
I don't know why he needed the money, but here's the thing that came up during the investigation that I don't mind sharing with you. And this came through either Larkin Smith told me this or it was the FBI or both of them. In Louisiana, they had a similar kidnapping. And the wife survived. And I don't know if it was the FBI or if it was some of our local law enforcement tried to interview the husband. He wouldn't talk to her. He said, I have nothing to say about it. Ransom was paid, they released her. And that was it. But it was in Louisiana. Now that's a big gap in terms of answering your question. But there was some thought, maybe he's done this before. Maybe he was the one that perpetrated that crime and got away with it so easily. Could we prove that? Of course not. But that generated more concern because...
Makes you wonder.
Yeah, there's no question about that. But the husband, which I can understand, didn't want to talk about it. But obviously he either knew or had seen the guy that actually kidnapped his wife. Now, whether he knew his real name, I don't know. But that was a conversation that never really developed anywhere.
Yeah, of why he needed the...
Yeah, but it stuck in the back of my mind that event happened in Louisiana, and I don't remember exactly where it was, so don't hold me to this, but I think it wasn't too far from where Jordan lived.
In Louisiana.
In Louisiana, but that doesn't mean that's exactly what happened.
Sure.
We were looking for, anything that could open the door for us. And I never met the guy. Well, I say the guy whose wife was kidnapped and returned. I never talked to him. And we never reaped any benefit from it. There were a lot of little issues that surfaced we were trying to put together. If you don't mind, I can get into one of them. Jordan stayed at the Twin Star Motel. I remember very distinctly talking to either the manager or the assistant manager, and I think he came up to the Markham building, and he was dead certain that there was a blonde-headed woman in the car with him when he checked in.
Edwina had dark hair.
Yeah. It wasn't Edwina. And he said, I saw her. I mean, he checked in. It was right outside my door. And then he added to it. He said the next morning they checked out, and she was in the car. Well, when Jordan was asked about it, he said there wasn't no blonde-headed woman. Yeah, does that solve the case? No, but I'd like to know. I wish I'd have known who it was, because this guy was dead certain. So I'd like to have interviewed her to see if we could gain any evidence that would be just a benefit to us in general. But he denied that there was any woman in the car. But this manager was just dead certain, both coming in and checking out, that there was a blonde-headed woman in the car. Now, was it a girlfriend? Was it somebody he picked up? Did he take her to another location? Did she know anything about the shooting? That's what I was looking for. Whether or not she was a co-conspirator. But we got nothing. And it just sort of dropped right there.
Well, let me ask you this. What do you think after Wednesday, when the book is closed on this and the case of Richard Gerald Jordan is over, unless anything crazy happens, what do you think is the silver lining here?
I don't know. I don't know if there's a silver lining. And the reason I say that is I'm going back to the length of time. No case should take 50 years or 49 years, however you want to put it. And during each one of those 49 years, Chuck, especially the older son, while they may not have been here, where they may have been over in Lafayette or wherever they live now, they still had to deal with it. And it's 50 years, so. And, Jordan has to live with it. I'm sure he doesn't want to be executed.
50 years, that's a lifetime for something.
It is. So you're sitting there thinking about 50 years prosecution, and it would sort of die down, and then it would resurface again when there was an appeal or something, and then die down and resurface. I know Chuck was just totally fed up. I'll use that expression with the process. He said, man, I don't know how much longer I can go through this. And I can understand it, saying, I don't know what his health is, because Chuck was older than me. So whether he's in his early 80s, mid 80s, I don't know, but I know there was a man that was, he was torn to pieces. And talking on the phone with Jordan didn't help him, because Jordan gave him a false sense of belief that you give me the money, you're going to get your wife back.
And then to have a gut punch.
Yeah. Boy, you just summed it up right. That was a gut punch. But in answering your question, I don't know. Because there's nothing to compare it to. 50 years or 49 years. I don't know the answer.
Are you going to, weird feeling, kind of finally? I'm sure you thought a few times over the years, surely this is over, and it's come back. But now knowing, unless Governor Reeves intervenes, this man's going to be, is that some closure for you, or is it just I
don't think I'll ever have closure, because I spent so much time on this, off and on, over almost 50-year period. A lot of this stuff's ingrained in my mind, and it just doesn't disappear. It'll never be out of my mind, simply because of the length of time, the type of case it is, the fact that in my mind it's an unprecedented case. And then you sit back and you look and say, what about those kids? Now, Jordan, from what I understand, has been pretty much of a model prisoner. From what I've been told, now I've never done an independent checking on it. But I don't think I ever totally evacuate that from my mind. Because I'm looking at pictures, those things stay embedded in your mind. I'm looking at the crime scene, and I'm looking at Chuck. I'm looking at the various appeals, issues raised. No, I don't think it ever escapes my mind. And, like anybody else, I'm sitting there thinking to myself, I've done this over the year. What if that was my wife? What would I do? And hypothetically, I've got 2 kids. What would I have done? How would I have handled it? And then this is 1976, and here we are in 2025, and I'm still dealing with it.
Still sitting here talking to reporters.
And you're sitting there thinking about, well, my God, where's the end? And I don't know that there's ever an end. There could be an end to life, or there could be an end where if the governor does something where he stays in parchment. But as far as the end of the Edwina Marter story, in my mind, it doesn't end because it was such a, totally outrageous case. And, as time goes on, things tend to slide to the back. And then when it's re-engendered, all this comes to mind, and they're going through 4 trials, and they've been spaced apart. And every time I'd have a trial, I'd spend 2 weeks getting ready for it. And then we go through the trial, and then appeals, and blah, blah, blah. Then maybe 2 years later, I get back in it. Those things just never dissipate.